Alright everyone, John Kiriakou wrote an article a couple of days ago with regards to Julian Assange and the fact that, in his opinion, it would be impossible for Assange to get a fair trial. That is, essentially, if charges are brought against him, if the Ecuadorian government does not shelter him, if the UK's government does indeed extradite him to the US, he will be put in prison. He'll basically rot in a cell, which is kind of what he's doing now anyway. A cell with a smaller window and without a comfy bed, and spend the rest of his life there under lock and key, probably without, more than limited access to the outside world. Like, don't you think there'd be fucking punitive punishment? And here's why you should care what John Kiriakou thinks. Really great example. During the middle of the Obama administration, and not many people remember this, they think that Trump attacks the press. Barack Obama personally oversaw the expansion of the surveillance state to include trying to headhunt after any journalist that was reporting on information that was classified. They did this. He was conducting active surveillance for years on a number of AP journalists. When this was found out, people were enraged for a while, and then they very quickly didn't care anymore. I wonder why the legacy media shut up. Was it the carrot or was it the stick that the DOJ came after them with? John Kiriakou was a CIA agent years ago. And he gave an interview on NBC where he discussed some of the finer points of some waterboarding that had happened, a few cases of torture or enhanced interrogation techniques of the prior administration, I believe, at the time, or early Obama era. And originally, the CIA and all these groups didn't really care about it. They're like, yeah, well, he didn't violate any rules. He's just, talking informally in this investigation. Then years later, they said, oh yeah, by the way, he violated, multiple laws. We're going to put him in prison for 30 months. So they held him for 2.5 years based on, I think, 5 or 6 different charges they found him guilty on. I can't recall exactly what they got him on. I think I think he was lying to investigators. That was, I think, one charge. Supposedly he was doing that. 3 counts of, the improper use of classified info or something. So they threw him in prison. This was the Obama era. Obama, supposedly the great glowing messiah of the modern liberal movement, headhunted after journalists. He spied on them. He massively expanded the surveillance state, and then he played dumb and pretended that he himself wasn't involved in the decision-making process with regards to the mass expansion of NSA activities. He stood in the way repeatedly of any attempt to reform these, and he had run on a platform of trying to undo damage towards journalists and the surveillance state and the police state sort of bullshit of the Bush era. That is, the way campaigner Obama was very much for the First Amendment, every possible respect, great reverence in a solemn and grave manner, as a president should. He looks at the Fourth Amendment and sheds a single tear while eagles sit behind him and spread their wings, gloriously backlit by the rising sun, rising over this great libertarian land. In reality, though, he was really a corporate crook that gave hundreds of billions of dollars to private entities, fucked around with the economy on a grand scale, and let pharma companies design our healthcare laws. For some reason, the modern liberals like him. I guarantee 20, 30 years from now, they're going to throw him under the bus the same way they did Clinton, based on his aberrance, his own problems. Like, oh yeah, that tough on crime stuff was kind of bad for us. Oh yeah, what about that time that Bubba Bill probably sexually assaulted people? No, not Monica Lewinsky. The other 3 or 4 examples. Ever hear of Juanita Broderick? So I wonder why Kiriakou would think of this, would care about this. Yes, I happen to agree with him. There's no way Assange gets a fair trial. Here's the problem. When people who are well-meaning, they're saying, oh, well, they just want to bring Assange back. They just want to charge him and put him on trial. Like, he'll get his day in court. He'll get a fair trial. No, he won't. Are you fucking insane? He's Julian Assange. And the thing is, he has done, guaranteed and demonstrably, objectively speaking, he has done nothing that hasn't been done by the New York Times and CNN and Fox and Breitbart and Drudge, every other major media firm in the country at various times. The only difference is that because there's been no scrutiny, there's been no active attempt to prosecute them. You're telling me, to all of the left-wingers that hate Assange so much, you're telling me you want to hand the Trump administration that you think is fascistic the ability to prosecute journalists and corporate media outlets. That's what you're saying to me. He heads WikiLeaks. He's basically the spiritual head at this point, the charismatic figurehead that has little connection anymore with his own former group. WikiLeaks spent years dumping both classified and rudimentary confidential material on corporations, on governments, and so forth. This is done by investigative journalists in other respects all the time. What did Ronan Farrow do with regards to Weinstein? It was investigative journalism. into otherwise confidential aspects of a man's life. And they tried to suppress him, by the way, because they were afraid of getting sued for defamation, probably. They were afraid of a protracted battle with this billionaire political donor. I wonder why. Why do you think they had to undercut him by creating the Me Too movement in the first place? They have to weaken the foundation to take the castle, dude. It's called a sapper. You know, learn a little bit of military strategy. You'll know a lot more about politics, too. Here's the thing. Kiriakou was abused by the Obama administration. I would say this. My hope is that the Trump administration will do what the Obama administration was originally hired to do and actually reform the things that are happening. When Trump alludes to the deep state, is he not alluding to the same sort of entrenched, police state-loving, censorship-loving, miscreant, establishmentarian assholes that Obama ran against? Of course he is. Against war and surveillance and all of the bad things in life. But the liberals have been so mind-fucked at this point by the post-Obama era spin cycle that they actually believe that Trump is the treasonous one if he, stands for journalism. It's terrible. It's a violation of the First Amendment to insult someone on Twitter, but it's not a violation if multi-billion-dollar companies that take tax subsidies deplatform people entirely. It's not a violation of the rights of the press, nor a violation of the right to privacy, nor a violation of the basic fundamental substance of journalism itself in an ethical framework if Julian Assange gets thrown in the gulag for the rest of his life on ultimately trumped-up charges. That's not an attack on the First Amendment. The New York Times has more sense than that. They came out with an article the other day basically saying what Kiriakou is saying. No, you can't get a fair trial. This would be an attack on the press. It shouldn't be done. Now, ultimately, I have no doubt, if the Obama admin had suggested the same thing, they would have gone along with it. They would have healed, they would have bowed before him, and they would have been good little thought slaves. They wouldn't have dared take on Obama. I think the one good thing about the fact that Trump has less support is that it does make it possible for people to side against the government at large in an abusive sense. It is possible for that to happen because his popularity happens to be low. Now, I would prefer to trust Trump because I don't know yet where he stands. He seems to have leaned more towards not wanting to charge Assange, not really thinking that he broke any laws. I agree with that, by the way, but he needs to come out and say it plain. I want to hear Trump give a speech on the subject, or at least allude to it. I want journalists to actually investigate his views on this and say, what do you think? Yes or no, Assange should be extradited here to hold trial, to stand trial. I want to hear a plain yes or no. No lawyers speak, no politicians spin. Fucking yes or no. That's what I want to hear from Trump. And I want to hear it from each legacy media outlet. The New York Times, that I have very little respect for, in all honesty, in their defense, has come out and essentially warned it would be a bad thing if Assange were charged. Then again, at the same time, it's not too much defense of them that I have. And I'll tell you why. Because they're not coming out and saying, and also he should be free and clear, and he should be able to leave the embassy and not be fucking locked up without any internet privileges. You are already ultimately holding the man in jail. He's your fellow journalist. You supposedly are journalists. You should defend him. You should argue that the nation of Ecuador should say, we're not going to extradite. The UK shouldn't extradite. He should be free and clear to go. Sweden already made bullshit charges of sex assault against him that turned out to be full of shit. He's already had people say he's treasonous, he commits espionage, he does terrible things. All he does is publish material given to him and his company by other third parties. That is no different than if the New York Times or CNN or Fox they're given a tip on something that's going on within the government and they talk about it. It's the same exact thing. That's about all. Peace out.